let me summarize. In the cost world, the management implications are the global improvements are the sum total of all small improvements. The assumption being all functions are independent of each other. However, in the throughput world, the management implications are the global improvements are not equal to the sum total of all local improvements. Now this leads us, or this comes from the thinking that all the functions are dependent or interdependent on each other. They are linked to each other. They are not independent. So in the throughput world we say, if you optimize a subsystem, you sub-optimize the whole system. So what is the big concern of the current organizations? Our management practices today are focused on making sure that there is a consistent output. How to reduce the impact of this variability on the output of the system or on the output of the company? There is inherent variability in every process. But if one stage of the process with variability impacts the performance of the next stage of operation with its own variability, these two add up and the output of the system could see huge fluctuations. Every natural process or even man-made process has got variability. To control within this variability or within this noise is fruitless, is futile. We all know that. So in a manufacturing process where there's a dependency of one stage on the next, and all these processes have on their own inherent variability, this makes the variability more complex to handle and control. And this is what in the cost world had forced us to focus everywhere and reduce variability everywhere. In the throughput world, our purpose still remains same, to make sure how we are consistently making more profit. In throughput world, we still want to be sure and confident that we will be able to reduce variability. And if throughput world has promised or is promising a better performance, inherently it is also promising our ability to control this variability with less effort. In throughput world, the indications are, or the direction is, to look for the weakest link or the constraint. And if we improve the performance of this weakest link, we improve the performance of the company. And what do we mean by improved performance? Improved performance means also to reduce variability in outcome of this particular link. If this weak link is a machine, the variability can be caused by fluctuating output, downtime, this machine being starved of material, this machine being starved of manpower, etc., etc. So what is throughput world telling us is, if the weak link is a resource, make sure that it is never out of material, it is never out of manpower, and it works the fastest it can. If the rated output is 100, it should consistently produce 100 pieces an hour. Now we can't say it should never break down, because it is a certainty that the machine will break down. The only uncertainty is when. So we try and do all sorts of maintenance activities so that this when is better answered. Or if the machine goes under a breakdown, we are able to quickly put it back up. If we are looking at maintenance, we are looking at storing spare parts. If we are looking at storing better tools, whatever may be the need to make sure that the output of this system is stabilized and not impacted by any of these other 4 elements that I just mentioned, we would have reduced variability. And in fact, reducing the variability on this resource is also reducing the variability of outcome on the whole. That means on the organization. After I have done the best to make sure the variability of outcome on this resource has been reduced, I have to put policies in place so that even in future the variability doesn't strike. For that, I have to provide for extra, you can say, capacity or extra ability of the other links in the chain or other machines to be more stable in operation. Or at least the outcome of the other resources should always be more than the outcome of this resource. Please note one thing here. I am not saying that make sure that the capacity is well balanced. This is a weak link. You can increase the capacity of the weak link to the capacity of other resources. That means you can have a balance line. But what I'm saying here is, in a manufacturing organization, if you have found out a resource which is the weak link, that means it has got the least amount of capacity to perform, make sure that it never happens that at any point in time other resources become the limiting factor. To do this, you need to buffer or provide for safety for the performance of this weak link. So protection means you have better timed schedule, and even after it being better timed, you still provide some extra cushioning so that this weak link is never starved. That means it is never dependent on anything else, and in doing so you will assure the output of the system to be consistent. You would have also reduced the variability in outcome. You will have better predictability, and the predictability of the outcome of the whole system can just be measured by the predictability of the outcome of this weakest link. So you don't have to have measurements everywhere else. The performance of the company can be judged by the performance of the constraint, because whatever the constraint does, the others can always do. So the constraint is limiting the output, and here I have reduced the variability and indirectly reduced the variability of the organization. Suddenly, the whole system performance is governed by the performance of my weakest link. This is what Throughput World is saying. Don't focus everywhere. Just concentrate or focus yourself on the limiting factor. As in the cost world, in throughput world also we need to have measurements, because all the measurements of the cost world do not fully apply to the throughput world. We need to have certain measurements in the throughput world which help us operate and measure our performance in the throughput world. The second assumption is that these measurements should help us take operational decisions easily. Earlier, we had mentioned that the three company performance measurements of net profit, return on investment, and cash flow are not good enough for taking operational decisions. But the throughput world measurements should relate very easily to these. If the relation is very easily defined, it can be very easy for people at the operational level to understand how their actions are actually impacting the performance of the company. If I decide to change a measurement, I should also know what to replace. Because if there is an error in understanding the new measurements, it makes the job of the management all the more difficult. At least earlier, people understood those measurements. Right and wrong, immaterial, but they understood. And after having understood those measurements, their behaviors were set. Now we are trying to imbibe new behaviors. So these new measurements should also be understood by everybody. Now, if we have a small set of measurements, and from that small set of measurements, we are able to develop secondary measurements which apply to all the people functioning in the company, one of the great tasks of managing an organization has been looked after, and that is simplifying measurements. In the throughput world, we use three measurements. The first measurement is throughput. Second one is called operating expense or OE. And the third is called I, investment or inventory. Using these three measurements, we can develop the measurements for every aspect of the business. And there is one direction which can be given to everybody in the company. If they follow that direction, the overall performance of the company will go up for sure. Earlier, we had seen that though the cost of operations went up or down in many departments, the total cost of the operation of the company went up. What I mean by this is, some departments were able to bring the cost down or meet their performance measurements, thinking that the profit will go up, but the profit did not go up. So one of the criteria for the measurement should be no ambiguity. The direction of the movement of the measurement should be clear. That means, if I say that reduce operating expense, and if they consistently reduce operating expense, the profit should go up. Now, if this operating expense is defined as it was defined in the cost world, naturally we know from our experience that the profit may not go up. This led to the definition and development of these 3 new measurements, which we will now define subsequently.